We've given enough on the logistics sides. I wanted to quickly introduce Andy Hunt. For those of you, I assume most of you should know who Andy Hunt is. For those of you that don't, certainly look online for a more detailed bio. I've known Andy for years. Worked with him a few times, from a standpoint of not just on the development side, but also his pragmatic thinking and learning book, I think changes a lot. It enlightens you on how software development's done, how the brain works, and I think it's just going to be very interesting to hear his perspective on where we are with Agile from the Manifesto days to now 10 years later, where we see Agile going, and where we need to challenge ourselves to improve our organizations that we work for. So, without further, Andy Hunt.
Good morning. Can you hear me in the back? Can you hear me up top? Can you hear me in the other room? Cool. All righty. I made that up. I was not scheduled to give the 8 a.m. keynote, as you may have noticed, so I'm still half asleep, but I'm going to soldier through. Thank you for coming. I feel kind of guilty. Every time I come to a conference like this, I always blow off the morning keynote. I never show up to listen to it, so thank you for coming out. I'm going to talk about a bunch of things about agility without going into any particular specifics of XP or Scrum or Alistair's crystal methods or any of that kind of stuff. But I want to talk about Agile in general and, as Bart said, from the Manifesto days up to today. The first thing I want to talk about has nothing to do with programming or Agile, but on the other hand, it has everything to do with it. So, follow with me here. If I asked you to think of an object, a common object like a tree, say, you would probably think of something like this. You would conceptualize it as sort of a symbol, as a standalone, discrete thing. And this is how we tend to look at the world. In fact, your brain is set up to encode your visual input and a lot of your input by reducing it to these sorts of symbols. So that's fine and well. The problem is when you're coding, when you're doing requirements analysis, when you're working, it's very dangerous to do this kind of symbolic reduction because you begin to sort of think that that is all there is to a tree. It's just a thing. It's just an isolated object. It's not. A tree is actually a set of interreacting, interrelated systems. And this comes from the discipline of systems thinking, which was popularized by Peter Senge in a book called The Fifth Discipline back in the early 80s, maybe late 70s, something like that. And it's a very interesting approach. When you start to look at things this way, you realize that, as a programmer on a team, it's the same situation. It's not just an isolated object, it's all connected. If somebody on the team is having a bad day, the code base is going to have a bad day. The rest of the team is going to have a bad day. It's all connected because these are all interrelated systems. So the danger of treating anything like a decontextualized object is you lose all that information of what is influencing it and what else is going on. The context is very, very important. And I'm going to say that probably another 35 times. You don't have to count. But I'm going to keep reiterating the point that context is critically important. And it's very easy to take things out of context. For instance, if you went to the doctor's office or a bank and there was a sign saying free candy, well, that's one thing. But if you saw it on your basic kidnapper van, not really sending quite the same message. Similarly, an axe is a traditional tool, very useful tool. I had a neighbor just last week take down a tree with one. Very handy, very normal, useful thing to have. I wouldn't recommend hitchhiking while carrying one. Again, it just, out of context, it's kind of sending the wrong message. So, any of you guys hear of a violinist named Joshua Bell? Some guy here knows him. He's like buddies with him. He was at the thing last night. Joshua Bell, well-known classical violinist, plays on a $3.5 million Stradivarius violin, packs Carnegie Hall with multi-$100 seat tickets. This guy's an A-list musician. So he participated in this experiment where he went into the Washington, D.C. metro, into the subway, and sat down, put his hat down, and just played for the rush hour crowd to see what would happen. And it was kind of funny. Here's this well-known, very famous in his world, classical musician. He played in front of, 15,000, 20,000 people, something like that, during rush hour. 7 people stopped to listen to him. He collected a total of like $12 in tips. Out of context. How do you know it's not just another crank in the subway? How do you know that's a $3.5 million violin that he's playing there in the subway and not something out of the pawn shop? It's context. So, sometimes it helps just to look at things a little bit differently. You've probably all made a solar system model in school at one point, or helped your kids make one out of Play-Doh. It's a very common thing. This is how we visualize and model the solar system. The problem is, as with all models, it's not quite right. It's a little misleading. Because the sun is whipping through the galaxy, and the galaxy is whipping through the universe too, the model is really much more like a vortex. It's a much more interesting way of looking at it. It's close, it's the same idea, the planets are whipping around the sun, but just by looking at it from a different viewpoint, from a different angle, you really get a different feel from it, Instead of just, statically going around the sun and coming back to the same place each year, which is kind of boring, we're going places. I don't know where, but man, we are whipping. That's very exciting. So sometimes it just takes a different way of looking at things. So back to the manifesto. Back in February of 2001, some 17 of us who were interested in such things got together in Snowbird, Utah to talk about the Agile Manifesto and to make it, create it, to come up with the name Agile, in fact. And that was interesting. That's been 12 years ago now-ish. That fall was September of 2001, and something else happened there of great import to the world. But interestingly, 10 years, I think it was, after 10, 11 years, when they shot Osama bin Laden, one of the top trending tweets on Twitter, that's hard to say at 8 in the morning, one of the top tweets was, "Who is this Osama bin Laden guy?" All the teenagers, all the youngsters, get off my lawn. They're all here tweeting, saying, "Who is bin Laden? Why don't I know who he is? Why is it important we killed him? Is he in a band?" Total facepalm. Barely 10 years after this mind-searing event into the global consciousness, and already people are like, "Wait, what? Already forgot about it." So you take something less important, less meaningful, like, oh, here's a new way to develop software. Well, good Lord, in 10 years, people have forgotten all kinds of stuff about what happened. So that's what I want to talk about a little bit today. So if you go to agilemanifesto.org, you'll see this wonderful artistically faded picture. There's the back of my head. I don't know if you can see that there. It's really faded, but that's the back of my head right there. And the start of the manifesto. Now, one of the things I find interesting, and you'll see this first stanza here reproduced on a lot of commentary and websites and articles and what all, they don't always necessarily reproduce this first part, which is kind of interesting. And the first part says, if you can't read it, we are uncovering better ways of developing software by doing it. So it's not saying, Eureka, we have found the answer. It's not even admitting that there is an answer. It says we are uncovering better ways of doing it. We're discovering it. It's an act of discovery. That's important to keep in mind. And when we picked the name Agile, there were several contenders going around. I'm not convinced now in hindsight that that was even the best choice. Perhaps we should have gone with a word like adaptable or resilient or something like that, perhaps, because the Darwin quote reminds us that it's not about strength or intellect that's key to survival, it's adaptability. Adaptability to change is what we want to do, and we want to do that by having constantly working software, by having software that is constantly ready to ship at any given moment. That's what we mean by working software over anything else. It's always good to go. So we didn't have a name when we first got together. But when they booked the conference, they had to call it something, so we called it tentatively lightweight methods. Well, that wasn't a very good name because that sounded like there was going to be a heavyweight would come around and clean your clock, you know. So that wasn't, that didn't stick around too well. So we came up with Agile, but that was new, you know, that we had a name for it. That part was new. But most of the rest of it wasn't particularly new. You know, even controversial at the time practices like pair programming really had a very long history, you know, going back to the good old days. It wasn't really that new. So when we got together for the 10th anniversary a year or two ago, I found this old notebook that I had actually had at the original meeting back in 2001. And as I'm looking through the notes, I found it interesting. We're all sitting around for 3 days, arguing about stuff, talking about stuff. We didn't really ever talk about specific practices. We didn't talk about pair programming. We didn't talk about refactoring. We didn't talk about unit testing. We didn't talk about, you know, estimation and these kinds of things. That just wasn't really the topic of discussion. So what we did talk about was what we meant by this concept of agility. And that was the key topic. So let me ask you a question. Raise your hand, if I can see you. If you're doing Agile, you or your company are doing Agile. Wrong. Bzzz. Trick question. I know it's early in the morning. It's bad for a trick question. But you don't do Agile. Agile is something you are. You can be Agile. You don't do Agile. You do some selected practices, hopefully, but that's not doing Agile. It's something you are instead. Okay, second question. Let's see if this works any better. Are you comfortable with the Agile practices that you're doing and your path to agility? See what I did there? Are you comfortable with that? Okay, they're afraid to put their hands up now. There is no right answer here. I'm going to get hosed. I'm just leaving my hands down. Yeah, you shouldn't be, it should never feel comfortable. If your project is on an even keel and it feels comfortable, then you're doing it wrong. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So, what is this Agile thing all about? What really, when it comes down to it, what are we talking about? Well, that's an interesting question, and it's actually a little bit hard to answer because one of the things we didn't do back at the manifesto meeting was come up with a definition. We never actually defined Agile particularly. We said what we valued, we gave some examples, we gave some principles, but we didn't really define it because we didn't envision it as something that was particularly amenable to being defined. It should be something that is ever changing, ever shifting, constantly, you know, responding to change and evolving. So that makes it kind of a hard thing to pin down. So I came across this great quote from Tom Peters, you know, management guru sort, who popularized the phrase ready, fire, aim, which is a little bit different than you usually think about it. And he quoted this, this fellow who was talking about Western aid into Africa. And in this book, this fellow is noting the difference between searchers and planners, which I thought really hit a good vibe. And he says here, if you can't read that, searchers find things that work and build on them, and planners apply blueprints. That's a big difference. We want to find things that work and build on them, not apply blueprints. Searchers find out if the customer is satisfied. A planner thinks he already knows the answers. A searcher admits in advance he doesn't know the answers, but hopes to find them through experimentation. That's what we want to do. That's part of Agile. We want to be searchers. We don't want to be planners. So that's one aspect of it. When I was doing research for the Pragmatic Thinking and Learning book, I came across this thing called the Dreyfus model of skill acquisition, which is quite an interesting topic unto itself. And Dr. Benner, who wrote this book, From Novice to Expert, talking about skill acquisition and how that works and how you can apply these kinds of things in her case in the nursing industry. She, in the preface, made this observation talking about the role of best practices and practices in general, saying that you can never completely formalize them or objectify them, take them out of context, because you've got to work them out fresh in context. in particular relationships and in real time, as she says. So the idea of static practices that everyone just does was never the intent. Practices aren't supposed to be static. They're supposed to evolve. You're supposed to work them out for yourself in the context of the project you're working on, the organization you're working with, the users that you're trying to create for. And that's a sense, I think, that we've kind of lost through the years, that this is really the goal that we're headed for. So at some point, I was writing the book, Practices of an Agile Developer, with my good friend Heathkits and Radio, and we needed a definition, just because it's a book, and it seemed appropriate. So I came up with this little bit here, just to try to put some stake in the ground, saying, okay, well, typically, what you want to see with an Agile development project is a lot of feedback that you use to make constant adjustments in a highly collaborative environment. Okay, that hits most of the good parts. And again, the kind of thing at the time that we were really trying to get away from, that we were trying to fix, was this idea of doing anything that was a big to-do. A big plan, a big event, a big something that required a mighty act to do it, and then a lengthy wait to see if it worked or not, and then the decline, the inevitable panic, and the finger pointing, and all the rest of that. That's what we wanted to try to get away from. And we still run into this, even though you may not see this in terms of, say, the overall coding on an Agile project. You might still see this when a meeting comes up, or a release comes up, or integration with other things. You know, anytime you see something that's a big to-do, it's a big high ceremony event, that's a warning sign, because then you're slipping back into this model. Instead, we want a much shorter, much simpler kind of a cycle where you do something, evaluate the feedback having done it in the real world in real time, and then correct as necessary, lather, rinse, repeat. That's what we want to try to do. So one of the examples that we used to use was this idea of different ways of firing a weapon, right? So if you have like a big military gun, what you would do is you line the thing up. It's a lot of work to do this. You've got to aim it, measure the azimuth, the angle, the elevation. You've got to calculate the weight of the projectile, how it's going to fall due to gravity, the wind, all these kinds of things. You plug them into a computer or use firing tables, and if you did everything right, it's going to land where the target had been about a half hour ago. That's great. I mean, there is use for this. If you're firing on something that's very large and isn't going to move, like a city, that's a great model. If you're trying to attack something that's a little more nimble, not going to work so good. And of course, the analogy is the same in software. If you're targeting a large target that's not moving, you can do this kind of plan-based approach. It works. It's fine. No shame in that. The problem is most targets aren't like that. They're a little bit more mobile, a little more flexible. So we like the idea akin to tracer bullets. Again, to use the firing analogy, with tracer bullets, you replace every so often a round in the magazine with one with a phosphor tip. So when you're shooting, you're getting real-time feedback under actual conditions. The target moves, you move right with it. The wind picks up, the wind dies down, anything else in the environment changes, you're getting the real-time feedback so that you can adjust and correct as necessary. That's what we want to see on an Agile project. We want to see that kind of real-time feedback. So how do we do that? Well, one of the things we've always recommended is you start off, day one, week one, first iteration, with a thin thread of execution that goes through the entire project end to end. From the mobile, through the website, to the database, through the logic middleware, to the whatever you've got plugged in, everything talking to each other, very thin, really no more than hello world, but it goes end to end. What you don't want, and I still see this all the time, well, we're taking the first 4 iterations for an architectural spike. No, you're not. You might as well be reading Slashdot or Dig or Reddit or something. That's not going to work well. I do not recommend that. Same kind of thing. It's like I talked to some team just a few months ago that said, well, we're taking the first 6 months to build the infrastructure, then we'll start working on features. I don't think so. I don't think that's going to work out either. I've never seen a project like that end happy. Not a good way to do it. There's a lot of risk involved. This way, you eliminate a lot of risk up front. You can at least prove that the tools all talk to each other, that you've got end-to-end connectivity. You've got working software. That still is the biggest driver. At any point, if you're wondering if something is agile or not, or if you're going the right way, ask yourself, is this directly leading to working software that we can play with and get feedback from? If it's not, you might want to question it. You want that working software to be always ready to deploy. You probably won't deploy it to actual users until, I don't know, whatever your release cycle is, every couple months, once a year, something like that. But you want to be ready at the drop of a hat to hit the button and make a release. And not have some excuse, well, oh, we can't do that right now because such and such is broken, or such and such doesn't exist yet, or we don't have an automated release procedure. Right? That doesn't count. You've got to be ready to deploy every day, whether it's in the cloud, onto a mobile, making these lovely little coasters that folks use, whatever it might be. So, I talked about feedback. How do you get feedback? Well, some of it's pretty obvious. Getting feedback on your coding activities is pretty well-worn territory. This is what we have unit tests for, test-driven development. Pairing and code reviews also help get you, close to near real-time feedback on how your code is going. Design is a little bit harder. How do you get feedback on a design? Do you ask people about it? Or do you try it? You try it. This is a great place to do prototypes. Try a couple different ones. One of the dangers I think we fall into is, especially with design and architecture, we tend to kind of run with the first thing that pops in our head. I'll do this. And maybe it works, it probably mostly works, but we don't really have the setup to kind of explore alternatives. We don't try different designs, we don't try out different things, we just kind of roll with it. Maybe we talk to a couple people, maybe we even have a meeting, something like that, and we just kind of go with it. So, there's an interesting story. Dick Gabriel, who used to be like Chief Grand Poobah at Sun, I forget his exact title, but it was like Chief Scientist or something. He had this marvelous presentation he gave some years back talking about the relative difference between level of effort from him getting a PhD in computer science versus getting a master's degree in poetry. And this was really quite revealing. For him to get the PhD in computer science, he basically had to write a handful of programs, like 1 or 3, a very small number n, and read a couple of books. That was all there was to it. For the master's degree, he had to write a poem a day as output for 3 years. He had to take one poem and rewrite it 60 times. 60. Now, think for a minute how that might translate. Here's an assignment. Here's a program for you to write. Good. Throw it out. Now do it again. Now do it 60 times in different languages, with different algorithms, with different ideas. Can you imagine how awesome you'd be as a programmer if you did that a couple times? How much you would learn from that activity? We don't tend to do that. We kind of spit the first thing out we think of and we move on. But there are other ways. So, a bit of a tangent there, but I think it's important. You want to verify, you want feedback on a design, try it to get real feedback. Requirements, how do you get feedback on requirements? You have constant user involvement. That's why we have them there. And you actually need as close as you can to get to the real users who will be involved with the program. There was a case some years back, and I'm trying to remember who it was. I think it was a friend of mine, where they were doing a shop floor automation system. And it was very textual based. You had to log in and type your name and password and type in these commands and this kind of thing. And they found out at the last minute that the user population they were working with was mostly illiterate. Oops. That didn't work out so good. So they had to scrap that and start over again. So, user representatives, somebody who's representative of the user community, be careful that they really are representative of the user community. Teamwork. How do you get feedback on how the team is working together well or not? Well, that's where something like Scrum's stand-up meeting really shines. That's a great tool to get everyone kind of on the same page and doing their thing. So that's how we can get feedback. While we're doing this, we want to make sure that we are doing truly continuous development, not episodic. So What I mean by that is you don't want to ever have a big episode of testing or a big episode of systems integration or have deployment or release be a big episode. You know, it sounds like a health problem. Oh, I had a real episode of testing yesterday. You know, you don't want to do that. You want to do a little of everything every day so it doesn't grow to be this big, horrific monster that will, eat your children. Small bit of everything all the way along. And so what happens is you get this sort of sense of rhythm, kind of a low-level rhythm during the day of checking in code to version control and doing builds and, the length of an iteration. An iteration really should be between 1 and 4 weeks. I've had people tell me, oh, yeah, we're Agile and our sprint length is 3 months long. No, that does not work. I had somebody from game company said they had 1 day sprints, and then they reset and did everything the next day. It's like, wow, that's pretty. Go with it. Hey, if it's working, that's fine. I'm not judging, but really 1 to 4 weeks seems to be a good guideline for what we're trying to achieve. So you see a lot of diagrams of people saying, well, this is what an Agile process looks like, and they're usually tailored to a particular process. I try to come up with something a little more generic to get the more salient points that I think are important. You start off with the code base. It's a thin line that gets fatter as you go through the iteration. You have a fixed date at the end of the iteration where you release it to somebody to play with and to look at. If you can't get it all done, you slip the feature, you don't slip the date. You want to keep that sense of rhythm. You want people to trust that sense of rhythm, especially outside the development team and the rest of the organization and other organizations, whatever. You want to maintain that trust of a sense of rhythm there. You need an automated build so that every developer can just hit the button and they'll build the product the same way, not differently on Fred's machine versus mine, that kind of thing. You need eyes on the code. Some folks like to do pairing, like to do pair programming. Some folks find that really abhorrent, and they'd rather do something like code reviews. That's fine. Again, the Agile police aren't going to come after you. The important thing is to get a second set of eyes on the code. How you implement that, how you go about that, hey, knock your socks off, invent something new, whatever, doesn't matter, as long as somebody gets a look at it. It seems generally a good idea to split up who's doing the prioritization and who's doing the estimation. Typically, you want the people doing the work to do the estimate and the people who are going to use it to be doing the prioritization of features. Seems a reasonable thing. And you want to do retrospectives, not postmortems. What is inherently wrong with the idea of a postmortem? Patient's dead, right? You've already lost the game. The feedback is too late to be of any use. So you need to do retrospectives. It's a good idea to do a retrospective at the end of each iteration. That seems like a reasonable thing to do. The trick is you need to be a little careful at how you do retrospectives. It's generally not sufficient just to get everyone in a room and say, hey, how'd it go? Beer's over there. You don't get necessarily a lot of good conversation that way. So this is one of those things where it's really important to have some guidelines at how to do this kind of activity. There's books out there in Agile retrospectives. We publish a great one, but there's others. They're out there. They're courses, they're workshops. But this is the kind of thing where you need to learn those sort of little consultant tricks with dot votes and 3M sticky pads and whiteboards and all those kind of consultancy things to help sort of mine or extract the information that you want from the team to get the feedback. It's sort of like if you were doing a study on, say, alcoholism, and you were doing a study on this and you were surveying some population. You can't just knock on someone's door and say, good morning, are you a drunk? Doesn't work well. You're going to get false positives in the college community. Yeah, every night. And you're going to get false negatives from the suburban housewife with the cooking sherry behind her back. Nope, never a drop. Whatever. Plug in whatever stereotype you want. You're not going to get truthful results. So you've got to be a little more circumspect about the retrospective. So overall, the key that we're looking at is to seek and apply feedback to change everything that needs changing. It's not just about the code. It's not just about the design or the architecture. It's about the process. It's about the product itself. It might be about the management. It might be about the users. If we could just get rid of them, that'd be so much easier. But whatever it is that needs it, everything is on the table to respond to change. That's kind of the whole point. So, where did this whole Agile movement come out of? What were some of the driving underlying thoughts and philosophies and science that kind of drove these ideas? Some of it is actual real science. We have the patron saint of real science here. Some of it comes from chaos theory applied to business practices, Japanese notion of kaizen, continuous improvement, systems thinking, as we talked about earlier, different ways of looking at risk management and reducing risk. So I just want to talk about these for a little bit and look at maybe some of the ideas that have fallen by the wayside that maybe we've forgotten about that are important. The biggest one is this idea of functioning at the edge of chaos. So you want to creep right up to that uncomfortable edge of chaos, but don't fall over. You fall over, then your team is in chaos and nothing gets done. But you slip back the other way, and you're basically just decomposing. You're just sitting there, rotting. You've got to be right on that edge. So these thoughts come especially from D. Hock, who was the guy who took Visa International from just a little piddly card processor to like a global behemoth. And he was very much a fan of this idea of functioning on the edge of chaos. So, coincidentally, is Ed Catmull, who's the president of Pixar, a little company you might have heard of. They've been mildly successful in their ventures. So there's kind of something to this. The biggest thing is this thing called emergence. Have you ever seen the Boyd's simulation before? This is kind of cool. You've got a simulated flock of birds, and they're flying around. They will split around obstacles and reform and make all these great sort of wave patterns and all this kind of very rich, very interesting behavior, none of which is coded in the simulation. There is no code. There is no line of code. There is no algorithm that makes it do that. The only code in that simulation does these three things: separation, alignment, and cohesion. Those are the only three principles it obeys. And you can animate orcs this way too, if you're so inclined, or any kind of large game system, big particle system. But the fun thing is, you get all this behavior kind of for free from these very simple interactions. And that is emergence, which is kind of the closest thing to black magic outside of quarks and Higgs boson and whatever else. You get complex behavior from simple interactions. Now the reverse is true. You can get very stupid behavior from very complex interactions. Just think of the IRS. Easy target, easy example. But the more complicated you make it, the stupider the emergent behavior is going to be. And we want to go the other way. We want very good, rich, interesting behavior from very simple interactions. And this is why you'll see that throughout writings on agility, we want simple design, simple code, simple process. We want to keep it very lightweight from the original name, chiefly for this reason, so that you can get this interesting emergent designs, interesting emergent code, behavior, what all. And it's like, yeah, okay, fine. You got some birds flying around on the screen and some animated orcs, but does this really work in the real world? Well, as luck would have it, I visited a company last summer that was doing exactly this. They had about 100 software developers and a 4-person executive team that ran the company, signed the checks, basically. No managers, no assignments, no attendance taken, a lot of telecommuters, none of this kind of usual infrastructure you would expect to see. How on earth does this work? Well, you've got an idea, something you want to add to the product, some new product line you want to start. You have to convince at least one other person to work with it on you. So if it's a really phenomenally stupid idea, no one else will go along with it, and it dies a death. Okay, that's good trivial rejection right there. You convince someone else, a couple other people to work with it on you. That's great. You are required to demonstrate working product early and often. Again, working software as the driver. It has to be doing something. You can't take off 6 months for an architectural spike or building out infrastructure or what have you. You've got to actually show what it's going to do. Meanwhile, other people are coming up with ideas, and they want people to work with them too. So there's kind of this competitive landscape. It's like, well, that project looks more interesting than this one. So the more interesting, popular things will tend to bubble up and get more people working on them. And the other ones that, maybe it was a good idea, but it's not that great, they'll get orphaned and died. That's their revenue. If you can see that, it's the line that just goes up. Works really quite well. And I thought at the time, okay, well, this is an outlier, an anomaly perhaps. I've run into a half dozen companies doing something very similar with very positive results. So what's our takeaway from this? Simplicity isn't a goal. It's not something that we want to achieve in our code for its own sake. It's a tool. It's a generative tool. Simplicity generates emergence. That's why we want to do it that way. Kaizen, Japanese notion, continuous changes based on continuous feedback. Again, I'll harp on this throughout. We need the software out there to see what it's doing in real time and fix it and move along with it. Very straightforward. How to reduce risk. So this is interesting about considering what's risky in a software development project, which is everything, really. This is why we want to take small bites. We don't want anything to be a big, major production because of the inherent risk. It's kind of like running through a cave with a flashlight. You actually can't see that far ahead of you. You don't want to run. There could be a chasm right ahead of you. You need to take small steps, take small bites. You need to time box everything. Now, we're comfortable with the idea maybe of an iteration and time boxing that, but what about meetings? Do you time box your meetings? What about something like, I'm stuck on a bug, how long before I have to go ask for help from somebody? That's a form of time boxing. Anything that could just run on and on forever, you want to time box, whatever it might be. We like transparency. We like the idea of maintaining a general awareness of what the rest of the team is doing. We want to show progress early and often with working software for transparency. Now people outside the development team, outside the organization, have something that they can gauge your progress on rather than some kind of funky chart or a spreadsheet or whatever else. We want real retrospectives for transparency amongst ourselves and on the team, all for the ultimate goal of having no place for bugs to hide. You're doing a 6-month architectural spike, that's a place for bugs to hide. You don't do retrospectives or you're not doing in-depth retrospectives, that's a place for problems to hide. You're not showing progress with working software, huge place for bugs to hide. So we just want to get rid of the breeding ground as much as possible where bugs can hide. And interestingly, once you start thinking along these lines, you realize that the line of code you don't write has no bugs in it. That's my favorite kind of programming right there. So, on the one hand, you want to do very reversible, very defensive programming, and there's all kinds of techniques you can do for that. But the short answer is, if you want fewer bugs, write less code. Interesting thought. One of the neatest parts that I like from Scrum is this sort of idea that when you're doing the stand-up meeting, that somebody is making a to-do list out of the what am I blocked on. So you answer the 3 questions, what did I achieve yesterday? What am I planning on working on today? What's in my way? And that's what's in my way is what the Scrum Master, project lead, team lead, manager, whoever you've got in charge, that's their to-do list. Their job is to go make way for the team, to clear the obstacles, which I think is a fine notion of looking at it. And just as a side tangent there, talking about the stand-up meeting, you really want to always phrase that as what did I achieve yesterday? What feature now works? What capability is there that didn't used to be there? What you don't want is for everyone to say, well, I worked on this form. And the next day comes, what did you do yesterday? I worked on the form again. Third day, I worked on the. This tells me nothing. You can now log in and it's using an MD5 hash that does a blah, 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 blah. Okay, dynamite. Now I know what you're actually doing, and it changes each day. You're actually doing something, not just working on the same old. So it pays to be very specific and concrete in that case. So, some unagile warning signs. You don't want to miss the boat like these dinosaurs who didn't realize the boat was leaving today. So a couple weeks ago, my buddy Dan North, who invented behavior-driven development and spells it with a U, he's British, go figure. He was apparently having a bad day with a client. It was kind of funny. So he sent off a series of tweets saying, look, the Agile Manifesto says this, and this Agile team is in fact doing that. And I guess he was rather frustrated with it. But I thought it was a very interesting and illuminating thing, because it seems almost plausible when you first look at it. So he goes through the manifesto, one stanza at a time, and says, okay, line 1, people and interactions over processes and tools. Dynamite. And on the first day, the Agile team says, which processes and tools shall we use? Wrong question. What's a better question to ask? How will we work together? People and interactions over processes and tools. How are we going to interact? How are we going to work together? When can you be interrupted if you're coding? Do you put a little stuffed animal up to indicate don't interrupt me? Do you close the door? Do you put sunglasses on, headphones? What's the protocol? What's the convention to say when you can be interrupted and when you don't? Are you going to take whole days off for coding or pairing and say we will not do email as a team or have any meetings on Tuesdays and Thursdays? Those are our coding productivity days. Are you going to do something like that? When are you going to answer email? How long is it okay to get stuck on a bug before you have to ask for help? An hour? A day? A week? I don't particularly care, but these are the sorts of issues that you kind of want to go over and agree amongst yourselves on the team. This is how we're going to work together. Are we going to do pairing? Are we going to do, whatever? That's what you want to answer, as opposed to, then you can get on to, tools and that sort of stuff, I suppose. And on the second day, working software over comprehensive documentation. And the team says, which automated spec framework should we use? That's just another form of documentation. It's nice. It's not driving you to working code. A better question might be, how are we going to do a thin end-to-end release? What parts and pieces do we need to do that? It's always driving towards working code as the primary driver. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation. And on the third day, the team says, how much shall we commit to in this sprint? The key word is collaborate. That means that these sorts of things should be a conversation. Not really, just not a question, not just an edict, but a conversation, a back and forth, a collaboration. And on the fourth day, adapting to change over following a plan. And on the fourth day, the team said, let us build a 200-story backlog and follow it. Apparently, these are true statements. That is creating a plan and following it. And it's a pretty long-term plan at that. So we get some discussion saying, oh, you Agile people, you don't plan. Well, that's not quite true. Planning is a fine activity. You can learn a lot from it. The danger is in the artifact that you produce, the plan itself. People believe because now this has some tangible form that it expresses some kind of reality, and it doesn't necessarily. The value from planning is in the learning that you do, not in the artifact you produce. That's the danger with planning. Speaking of artifacts, you notice we talked about working software over documentation. A lot of folks say, oh, that means Agile, we don't ever do documentation. No, it doesn't say that. There are plenty of occasions where you legitimately need to do documentation. You might need it for regulatory purposes. You might need it for training purposes. You might need it for whatever. If it's a legitimate need, absolutely do it. Schedule it. Put it on your backlog. It's a thing. You got to do it. Do it. Do it properly. What we want to avoid is this, creating shelfware. It's like, well, why are you making detailed design documents? Which the very phrase gives me hives. Someone says we're making detailed design documents. It's like, oh, I got to go wash. That's just Generally a horrible, horrible idea. That's the kind of thing we want to avoid, where the only reason you're creating this artifact is to set it on a shelf somewhere because there's a corporate mandate to do so, and there's no actual value derived from it. So there's value in code that works, that's dynamite. There may or may not be value in documentation. It depends on context. Depends what value anyone's going to get out of it. If someone gets value, do it, dynamite. Some other warning signs, sloganization, where the agile ideas just become buzzwords, like we're a customer-focused organization. You've heard these kinds of statements. It just degenerates into buzzwords. Does the team know when to follow rules versus exercise judgment? Are you demanding too much conformity? Everyone has to use the same editor and the same desk and face the same way and this kind of thing. And my favorite, simply oversimplification of complex situations. Anyone who says, oh, all you have to do Agile is these 3 things. Yeah, they're probably selling you something. That's probably not true. It's more complicated than that. So, unfortunately, Agile cannot fix stupid. And if you can't see that in the other room, it says, do not hold wrong end of chainsaw, which is kind of frightening. Agile was not designed to fix stupid. Maybe something else was, but that's really not the point here. So back in 2000, this guy, Capers Jones, did some research trying to find best practices on software projects. And it was a huge undertaking, big, thick book he produced from it. It's like a 2-inch book in the first edition. And he looked at some 9,000 software projects, over 600 companies, everything from these big DoD, let's build a fighter jet with a $3,000 coffee maker, down to, garage outfits doing shrink wrap software. And he tried to, weigh, okay, does this particular practice help or hurt or whatnot? A lot of them came out neutral. Stuff like UML came out as neutral. It didn't help. Didn't really hurt. It just didn't do nothing, really. It was just taking up space. But in this whole study, he starts off right in the preface and makes the observation that really it comes down to the people. If you've got really good, sharp developers, you can hinder them with a crappy process, and they'll still turn out okay. Not as good as they could have, but they'll still get through it. But if you've got some, lame, unskilled, naive, novice teams trying to do this, even with a great process, you'll only achieve marginal results. So again, the people matter, the process less so. And he actually quantified this, saying, okay, well, if you've got skilled staff or skilled management, it will raise your productivity by some 40, 50, 60%, something in that range. But if you've got unskilled staff or management, it will wreck your productivity by more, 80, 90%. It will take you down. And that's unfortunate because we all have our moments. We're not as bright as we think we are in general. And this is kind of the next problem I want to talk about. We have this idea, I think because we work with computers so much, we tend to think that people are at least somehow kind of similar, that at least that we're logical, we're rational, we think through things, we weigh the evidence, we make judgments. But this is an incorrect model of human cognition. A better picture might look something more like that. The old gibbering monkey. That's what's going on inside our heads. If you look on Wikipedia under cognitive biases, right? These are bugs in our software. These are things that cause us to make bad decisions, to think of things wrongly, to make improper comparisons, to come to the wrong conclusion all the time. Some of these really affect Agile adoption and working in teams. One of the biggest ones is this wired-in need for closure. So here's a Dilbert cartoon where Dilbert's saying, I didn't have any accurate numbers, so I just made up this one. Studies have shown that accurate numbers aren't any more useful than the ones you make up. How many studies showed that? 87. And this is a really big problem because, again, on the variability of human abilities, some folks are really uncomfortable with this. They have to have a number. When will this project be done? Well, we don't know. We're calculating our velocity, and we'll know after a few. No. When will this project be done? There is a hole in my spreadsheet. There must be a number there. 42. Okay. Happy. And it doesn't matter, even if folks know that the information is blatantly false, clearly invented, made up, manufactured, has no essence of truth to it whatsoever. By God, I filled out the hole in the form and I'm happy now. It's there. That's that driving need for closure. Some folks are more comfortable with it, some much, much less so. This is something we're always fighting against because we don't like closing things off and making decisions early. We like uncertainty. We want to embrace uncertainty for a very simple reason. When do you know the least about a project, right? On the very first day, when it first starts up with somebody's wild idea. Hey, let's build this thing. All right, I know nothing about it so far. Maybe we've got a title for it. Maybe we know who's working on it, but we know the least about it on the first day. When do you know the most about a particular project? Well, after it's done, after it's shipped, when the check clears, whatever happens here right out at the end. So when do you want to make your critical decisions about the project? Do you want to make your decisions early on when you know the least about it? No. You want to make your decisions down in here when you know more about it. That means you're going to be running with a lot of lack of closure, and that can make some people acutely uncomfortable. So that's something we have to fight against. We are subject to the fundamental attribution error, which isn't, I just love the picture. It's just cool. The problem with this is we tend to think, okay, if I did something really heinous and really bad, it's because I skipped breakfast. If you did something really heinous and bad, it's because of who you are as a person. It's because you're tall, you're short, you're Republican, you're Democrat, you're a .NET coder, you're a whatever. It's you. It's not context. It's not the situation. Nothing drove you to it. It's just you. And of course, that's not how it works. Everything's driven by context. Your behavior, the other teammate's behavior, it's all about context. It's not a fundamental attribute of the other person. We are very, very loss averse. Study after study says that we will do anything to avoid losing something we already have. Now, this is pernicious because we may have invested very heavily in a particular language or tool set that we use. We love this particular database. Well, we don't love it. We actually hate it with a passion, but it's what we know really well, and we're afraid to let go of it. So there's a great example here, the South Indian monkey trap. Apparently there's a lot of monkeys running around in South India, and they have to be caught. So what a lot of the folks do is you dig this hole in the ground, it's kind of like a cylinder, and then you make a wider bottom, and you put the bait down in there, bananas in this case. So the monkey comes along, it's like, bait, goes in, grabs the bananas, and can't get out with them. Now, all the monkey has to do to free himself is let go. See where I'm headed with this? All he has to do, and of course he doesn't. The monkey refuses to let go, so he's sitting there holding on, and he is stuck. He is trapped. And he gets picked up, and they do whatever they do with caught monkeys. Same thing can absolutely happen with us. You've got to let go. If a technology is hurting the project, hurting the team, hurting your career, but you're real familiar with it, you've invested in it, you've got certifications, you've got a lot of investment, you can't think of it that way. And it's hard to, because we're wired to, but you've got to be able to let go and move on with it. The other thing that kind of hits us is second-order incompetence. This is a fave. This happens all the time. That's not knowing what you don't know. And the classic example was this fellow who went to go rob a bank. He goes in, robs the bank, goes home with the loot. Cops come to his door and arrest him. He's like, how on earth did you find me? They're like, duh, we saw the security feed footage. He's like, oh, you couldn't have. You couldn't have. I was wearing the juice, man. What are you talking about? I said, oh, everyone knows if you put lemon juice on your face, you're invisible to security cameras. Clearly no unit testing going on here. Unfortunately for him, no prototyping to kind of validate your assumptions. He didn't know how little he knew about this subject and went off to go rot in jail for it. The other side of this, so what happens is, if you're very unskilled at a particular topic, you will tend to overestimate your abilities by 2 or 3, 4 times. The converse is true too. If you're very good, if you're an expert, proficient at a particular topic, you will tend to underestimate your abilities. So you ask the expert on the team, hey, can we do this? I'm not so sure about that. You ask the novice, hell yes, boss, I'll have it done next week. Probably not. Probably not. So we run into the danger of not knowing what we don't know. How do you try to fix that? Good critical thinking skills always help, but just asking yourself some simple questions is always a great idea. Java's dead as a language, or Java will live forever as a language. How do you know? Says who? How specifically? Compared to what? Just these sorts of questions of really, let's drill down on this. Or the classic consultant's trick of asking the 5 whys. Oracle's going to destroy MySQL. Really? Why? Well, because of this. Why? Because of this other thing. Why? Keep drilling down to get to the root cause if you can, or at least figure out what somebody's talking about, or what you think. I think this is going to happen. Really? Why? Well, I read it on Reddit. So it's on the net. It has to be true. There was a kitten involved. Whatever. You want to try and drill down in your own thinking and say, okay, is that really valid, or isn't it? So, how do we get better at being agile? Well, one of the problems is most people at most skill levels get stuck around advanced beginner. You get sort of just enough skills to do what you need to do, and you get kind of stuck there. Now, from the Dreyfus research, we know that novices have to have rules to be effective. This is how you can get people with no domain knowledge to work at like a call center or something like that, right? Very strict rules. Ask them if it's plugged in, yes or no. Ask them this, tell them that. They're just following a script. But interestingly, at the other end of the spectrum, the expert cannot be burdened with rules. They've done studies that show that if you do that, you basically drag the expert down to the novice level. You're ruining their expertise by making them follow the rules. Ed Catmull from Pixar doesn't believe in rules at all. He thinks that that's just the wrong way to go with it. So we don't want to have any kind of rigid rules of here's how you do agility or here's how you act agile. Instead, we want to take it as kind of like a philosophical approach. Right? So we want to start with, say, the definition in mind. What we want to do, what we are always aiming for, is to get feedback from every activity, use that to make adjustments, not just on our own, collaborating with everyone involved, all the time. To be able to do this, we have to have an environment where all of our practices, development practices or management practices, actually generate continuous, meaningful feedback. We need to know. We need to know before we start an activity, how are we getting feedback from this? You sending a release to the user, that's dynamite. How are you going to get feedback from that? We're scheduling a meeting for tomorrow. Great, what's the feedback? How do we know when we're done with the meeting? Is it time boxed? What's the feedback from it? We need to be able to evaluate that feedback in context. That meeting went really horrible yesterday. Well, why? Well, the donuts were late. Okay, that's fine. Probably not as serious as all that. But things happen, extenuating circumstances happen. You don't want to overcorrect when you steer and crash the car. You need to evaluate the feedback in the context. You need to be able to change whatever needs changing. Code and process is moderately easy, but your team, your interface to the rest of the organization, the customer, these might be a little bit harder. If there's stuff you can't change there, that's going to be a real limiter on whether you can even do agility or not in this context. You need to be able to change all these things. Then, with all that going, you can actually look to say, okay, we are about to do this. Is that in line with the sort of agile mental model, the philosophy? Is this favoring individuals and interactions? Is this driving us towards actual working demonstrable software? Is this featuring close collaboration with the customer? Are we responding to a change? Or are we just plodding along doing the same old, same old? With all that in mind, you can actually approach being agile. Now, almost. Ed again says, you know, if everyone's trying to prevent error, it screws things up. That's a very interesting concept. If you're working really hard ahead of time, notice a trend here, working hard ahead of time to try to prevent error later, you're missing out on a huge opportunity. Because the cycle we really want is to try something, fail at it, ooh, the F word, learn and repeat. Now, in some organizations, this truly is the F word. You can't admit that you fail at something. And, you know, you're dead right there. That organization will not survive. You have to be able to fail. If you haven't failed at 6 things before lunch, you're not trying hard enough. You need to come up. You know, don't take that one design notion off the top of your head. Try 5 more. 3 of them will probably be utter failures. Go, oh, that's why no one does it that way. Now I know. Okay. That's fine. That's perfectly fine. Much better to do that than, you know, either just stick with the first dumb thing that comes in your head or never try it at all. You know, keep generating different ways of approaching it. You live with the failures. Okay, I have learned something now. And lather, rinse, repeat. That's what it's all about. So this brings us to wind up with the single biggest missing element from Agile in the last 10 years. And this I find really, really quite interesting. When they interviewed a bunch of us at the time, they said, you know, 10 years from now, what do you see happening? What do you see as the future of this Agile movement? What do you forecast is going to happen? And a bunch of folks thought, as I did, that one of the things you would see would be an explosion of Agile methods. It wouldn't just be, you know, extreme programming and Scrum or crystal methods or you know, any of these guys, more than just this handful. You'd have thousands, right? Every consultant house, every consultant and their dog would have their own branded, you know, Fred's Agile method, whatever it might be. And you'd see this whole explosion of different things that honored the manifesto, but had their own different implementations of it. You know, different ways of making sure eyes get on the code, different ways of scheduling and time boxing, and different ways of looking at that. And that never happened. You know, we got some stuff from Lean, we got some stuff, you know, from Kanban. There's 2 or 3 new practices, planning poker. That was it. Right? We didn't see this explosion of thousands of different methods because nobody added them. Because no one was really busy being agile. They've been busy doing a handful of agile practices. And that's the difference. That's what we need to fix. So, turns out in theater improv, they have a really interesting technique. So the way this works, you got a couple actors out on a bare stage, and they've got to concoct a play in real time. They're out there in the spotlight with no script. Sound familiar? That's like a day at the office, right? You're out there, and there's no script. You don't know where this is going to go. So what they have to do is, you know, the first person will start off and try and set the scene a bit and say, okay, here we are on the moon. All right? Second person says, yep. Looks like the moon, okay. Well, we're dead. I got nowhere to go with that. Worse, they can say, no, we're not. Really? What do I do with that? I got nothing. So, the rules for improv are you must agree to the basic premise, whatever's been set up before you, and you must add to it. You have to add your bit. Here we are on the moon. Yep, and I think I just saw something move behind that rock. Ooh, okay, I added something. We're going somewhere. I think you're right, says the other person, and I saw something over there. Or let's get back to the ship before it eats us. Whatever it might be. You've agreed with the general premise, and now you're adding to it. They call this the yes and method. This is what you want to do on an Agile project. Yes, I agree with the manifesto. I agree with the practices that we're doing, and here's what we need to do in our context, in our particular situation. That is one of the biggest things that we are missing and that we need to add back into Agile. How do you do that? He says, as he winds up. Well, you need to come up with the next great idea. All right, I'm going to give you a couple clues of how you might go about that. And this comes from the Pragmatic Thinking and Learning book. Where do great ideas come from? Well, they come from your brain, more or less, but not all of your brain, a particular part of your brain where it's not under conscious control and it delivers the answers kind of asynchronously. So if I asked you a trivia question and you knew what the answer was or you had known at some point, it doesn't come to you right away, right? It'll be a day or two. You'll be in the car, you'll be in the shower, you'll be doing the dishes. Oh, it's this, right? That's asynchronous. The mechanisms in your brain will deliver that to you at some other point. These sort of pre-conscious thoughts and ideas that we want to harvest are very fragile. You may have had that experience where you've had like a really vivid dream, really sensory rich. It's like you were there. You wake up, you try to explain it to someone, you try to verbalize it. What happens? It gets hard. The more you describe it, the harder it becomes to remember it. These are very fragile thoughts. It turns out there's an interference mechanism between the centers of the brain trying to do the verbalization versus the ones that generated the imagery in the first place. And you've got some sort of bus contention, if you will, going on there. So these things are kind of fragile, kind of slippery. Who has these thoughts? Everyone. Absolutely everyone in the world has world-changing, brilliant ideas. The problem is nobody really bothers to keep track of them. You get some idea while you're out, oh, that's cool, I should pursue this, or this might be a neat idea, and 30 seconds later, squirrel, it's gone. It's like trying to step in the river a second time. It's just gone. You've got to be able to somehow capture these sort of random ideas that are flying around. So here's really the crux of the problem. Where is the worst place you can be to be creative and inventive? Yep, right in front of the keyboard. That is the worst place to be. Why? Well, a very same sort of bus contention mechanism. If you're sitting there typing, you're activating the sort of symbolic processing regions of the brain, or processes in the brain, if you want to think of it that way, and that's blocking out the parts you're trying to get at. Have you ever had the experience where you're stuck on a bug, you're stuck on a design problem, and you're just frustrated, you're banging your head, you can't figure it out, you stand up, you walk away from the keyboard, you're halfway down the hall, you're out to get into your car, out the building, and bang, the answer comes to you, right? Happens all the time. That's why. Once you've gotten rid of that sort of symbolic mode lock, then these other areas of the brain can come to the fore, and the idea will bubble up to you. Any idea, any brilliant insight, any question. Most things aren't eureka, I've just invented something really cool. It's usually, I wonder why that never works, or this always works, or why can't I do that? Right? It's that niggling little question. So we're faced with kind of a problem here. We're not in front of the computer. That's why we had the great thought in the first place. But we need to record this idea somehow. We need something with us all the time that we can just jot down a few notes. I like to carry a little Moleskine notebook with me all the time with my Fisher Space Pen. Right? This is the kind of one that will write upside down in a boiling toilet, should the need arise. Got to be prepared. But you want something that's with you all the time. Some folks stick index cards in their back pocket. You could use your iPhone, dictate a note to yourself, call your voicemail, and leave a note to yourself. And if you've got one of these services that'll take your voicemail and transcribe it for you, you can be in the car in rush hour, call yourself, leave a message, get home, and have the text sitting in your inbox, where you can copy and paste it and do something with it. Whatever. Some way of capturing it. Once you've captured it, then you need to work with it, possibly in something like this, like a mind map. Right? This is a great way for exploratory thinking, because once you have created kind of a category of this kind of thought, this sort of thing that you're interested in, it's a phenomenon sort of like sense tuning. If I say, look for any red in the room, suddenly you see this guy's shirt, all the chairs, this, that, the other thing. Your brain kind of sets its filters to look for that. So once you've created and are working with a mind map or something like this where you've got a sense of classification of ideas, your brain will start filtering to look for that. You'll start seeing articles on that. You'll see a tweet about that. You'll see a story over here about that. It'll start being obvious to you where these things are coming from. You want to have this sort of a mind map hand-drawn. You don't want to do it on the computer because, again, you want to avoid that sort of symbolic lock. You want different senses involved, fine muscle movement, gross motor movement, these sorts of things. And you want to be able to make this a real working diagram. This should be like a big piece of paper on your desk, eat lunch over top of it, spill coffee on it, right? Leave it open. It's a total work in progress because, again, of the asynchronous nature of these sort of preconscious thoughts that you're trying to harvest. When they do bubble up and you're aware of them, you want to be able to just grab something and jot it down. And, oh, look, that actually relates to this other thing over here. I'm just going to draw a big line. Very low friction. You don't want to have any kind of artificial constraints. You don't want to make this like an outline in Word or anything. For one thing, you don't want Clippy yelling at you. But the second thing, you don't even want the sort of artificial hierarchy of an outline to influence your thoughts. These are very fragile ideas that we're trying to harvest here from your mind. So we want to be able to just kind of jot them down as quick as we can without losing them. So that, I think, might help generate the next big idea on your part. Overall, I love this quote that says, "The real voyage of discovery is not in seeking new landscapes, but just in having new eyes." So I hope I've given you some opportunity for things to think about today and through the concert to have some new eyes. You can reach me. My email is andy@pragprog.com. I can be found on Twitter @pragmaticandy. Here's a couple of the books that I've written. You can get them from our publishing company at pragprog.com, as well as Amazon and every server in China. And any place else that you shop, it's all out there. It's all good. Thank you so much for having me. I hope you have a great conference.
We have a few minutes for a few questions. So, and then I did want to thank Andy. I know I probably failed to make the announcement earlier. He was scheduled for the closing keynote, our morning keynote. I couldn't fly in last night, and he graciously took the morning slot. So thank you for coming early. Does anybody have any questions so that we can maybe have a few questions? We won't have one back here? Any questions? Okay, hold on.
You mentioned about the improv thing. I agree. And what do you do when you disagree vehemently?
Depends on the context, doesn't it? It's a consultant's favorite answer, right? It depends. In that particular case, if it's going to advance the plot, then it's probably an okay thing to do. If it's going to wreck what has been set up so far, then it's probably not a good idea. So similarly, if this is going to advance your goal to get working software in people's hands to get feedback from it, then okay, disagree with it. You say, no, pair programming is a stupid idea. I hate iterations, whatever it might be. If you've got a better idea and it's going to advance the general cause of getting working software out there, go for it. Love to hear it. Next.
You spoke of that moment where your product owner or your organization is looking for that closure number, that number in that Excel spreadsheet. So many of us have to give that number. What is the delicate line between planning and just doing?
Estimation in general is a nasty, sticky subject. I have been so burned from it for so many times. I've been writing code professionally for 30 years. I still can't give decent estimates. The closest thing I come to is like, okay, I figure out to the best of my ability what I think it'll be, then double the number and go up once in units. So that's a one week job. Yeah, it's really 2 months. That kind of scale, and that gets me closer. Sad to say, it's a very fraught thing. There's a great pair of articles that Ron Jeffries wrote in our PragPub magazine. We have a free monthly magazine that covers a lot of interesting agile topics and tech topics and these kinds of things. And he wrote a really great article on how estimation was evil and that kind of thing. And then the next month, he wrote the article saying why you absolutely had to do it. I can't relay it here in a minute or two, but if you're interested in that, I highly commend it to that. I like to at least warn folks when they do desperately need a number, come up with the number by whatever method you use, and make it very clear what the variability is. This has an 80% chance of being wrong. Phrase it as a confidence interval. Phrase it in some way that they are painfully aware that it's not 42. It's a number somewhere between 10 and never. Next. Oh. They're running up that way.
I can talk loud.
He can talk loud. Go ahead.
Along the same line of what you're doing here, because this talk was very useful in communicating practical things at the level we needed. Do you have a book? Do you have things that you can point to help us deal with the dysfunctional situations, which is actually the normal case? I have a client who just plain can't be convinced that he has to just start delivering some software. He wants to put it out there for 6 months. I have a client that just won't do iteration. I don't want to give up, but what are practical ways along the lines of the kinds of things you did in this talk? Do you have a book? Do you have suggestions to point us to?
I don't particularly. So the question was what if you have folks who just don't want to play? They just won't do iterations. They just don't want to get software out there. They just aren't going along with it. And this can happen, especially you can have a customer where they just don't want to participate. They say, oh, just build it. It'll be fine. I don't care. They're lying, clearly. We were talking last night, and I think Bart mentioned he loves the analogy of telling someone, okay, if you've ever had the experience of building a house, right, and a fair few CEOs and product sponsors probably have had this experience, you say, you will check in on it every day to make sure that it's going the way you want. If you just leave it and come back a year later, you're going to get a horrible mess. And this is a well-known, I just lived through this last spring, and yeah, we were there on site every day, and it's like, no, that beam does not go there. That doorway that goes over the giant chasm, no, that's a bad idea. Let's not do that. So you can try to convince them of the necessity of participation. You can try to convince them of the various goodnesses of agile practices. There's a study that shows this, there's this that shows that. But at the end of the day, people aren't convinced by that. They're not convinced by logical arguments, right? It's that chattering monkey brain again. They are convinced sometimes of whatever is in their own special interest. So whatever their pain point is, if you can demonstrate that any of this makes that pain point go away, and demonstrate that a few times repeatedly, then you might have a better chance of them listening. At the end of the day, there are some folks out there who just won't be convinced of anything. They think the moon landing was faked. They think, JFK was an alien and living with Elvis, whatever. And, at that point, I got nothing. Cattle prod sticks are good. Give them a little parking lot therapy. Whatever. I got nothing. Okay, last one.
Yep, last one. Can you talk about some of the principles?
Okay.
Can you talk about some of the principles of, say, good hiring practices for any of these teams?
So that's an interesting question. Principles of good hiring practices. Not specifically. That's not something that I do a lot of. There is a good book I can recommend. Joanna Rothman has a book called, it's something like Hiring Geeks That Fit, more or less. So there could be a few different pronouns in there, but it's along those lines. The thing that you want to do, and actually this is a good illustration, because this kind of thing comes up all the time. Okay, I want to do X. I have no experience doing X. I don't know the right way to do it. I don't know the agile way to do it. Apply the questions. Okay, so let's see. I want to value people and interactions. All right, interactions. Can I work with this guy? Bring him in, not for an interview, but to pair program with the team for a day. or a week? Can I actually work with them? Can I get real feedback in real time under real conditions, sound familiar, to see whether this is going to work or not? That's the kind of approach I would take. And just as a side note, that's the kind of thing, as I mentioned, we run a publishing business. We are now we have been for many years, a mid-sized publisher. We're comfortably in the top 20%, probably top 15% of publishers, run as an agile business. We have a continuous build machine. All the authors' source code, all the writing they do for their book is kept in version control. We have iterations, we have sprints, we have multiple eyes on the code, tech review kind of thing going on at various points. We have a lot of the trappings you would see on an agile software project. And we came up with a lot of these things and various production techniques and whatnot the same way. Well, we need to do this. I don't know how to do that. Okay, how can we do that in an agile way? What gets us towards the goal of having actual text from the book out there in people's hands? What gets us there featuring interactions between people instead of some tool, some process, some whatever else? So by going through and sort of thinking of those questions in an unknown area, that's how we're able to kind of move forward. And that's what I would suggest you do in a similar circumstance. Hey, that sounded pretty good. Tied it all together. Thank you so much.